Let's talk about election 2022. Former President Donald Trump's crusade for vengeance suffered two devastating blows after Georgia Governor Brian Kemp and Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger won their primaries despite rejecting Trump's entreaties to reverse his 2020 election loss. It was Trump's biggest primary defeat. Joining me on the morning show, Chris Hand, a government law attorney and co-author of the book, America, the Owner's Manual. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, Bruce.
So is this a huge warning sign for the way Republican voters view the former president's crusade to punish those who weren't willing to overturn the will of the voters in 2020? A sign that elections are about the future and not the past?
Well, Bruce, elections are typically about either the present or the future as opposed to the past, and they're typically about voters and what their hopes and concerns are rather than what some former elected official or candidate's desires for the electorate are. And that certainly proved true last night in Georgia for Republican primary voters in that state. As you reported earlier, Governor Brian Kemp won overwhelmingly by more than 50 percentage points, despite the opposition of the former president. Same with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, who in a multi-candidate field won a majority despite that opposition. And the same with Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr, who also defeated his primary opponent, who was backed by the former president. So it certainly suggests that Georgia primary voters are interested in talking about issues of today or of tomorrow rather than of yesterday.
Now, Trump did not win despite baggage and a scandal. I'm talking about Herschel Walker's win, the former football great. Walker, Trump's pick for the U.S. Senate. It showed scandal doesn't matter, nor does it usually when it comes to Donald Trump. The Senate race is interesting because he'll face Democrat Ralph Warnock. Interesting because it could have a major impact when it comes to control of the Senate chamber.
Well, that's a huge race. You'll just recall that, just a year and a half ago, in January of 2021, Georgia elected two Democratic senators, Jon Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock, to take control of the United States Senate. So this is a crucial race which might decide control again. I think a couple of different dynamics in that race. One, even though former President Trump did support Herschel Walker, he also had a broader coalition of support among Republican leaders, and not the least of which is, obviously, Georgia just won the National College Football Championship. Herschel Walker's been one of the best-known people in the state of Georgia ever since they won their last college football championship in 1980. So he's been known in the state by more than 4 decades. Those are some of the forces that helped to propel him to victory yesterday.
Back to Brian Kemp. He is going to face Stacey Abrams, a rematch from 4 years ago. But there's a different dynamic this go-round. 1.2 million new registered voters this year, and the base is more diverse. How might that impact the outcome of the election?
Well, Bruce, there's the old saying that every election is its own election. And of course, as you say, just 4 years ago, Governor Kemp defeated Stacey Abrams by a very narrow margin, 50,000 votes in November of 2018. There are a lot of new voters in Georgia. And of course, Stacey Abrams has been very active in bringing new voters into the fold, expanding the base of the Democratic Party. So I think much like elections we see here in Florida, the one thing we can be sure of is that the general election campaign for governor in Georgia will be closely contested, probably narrowly decided with all of these new voters, and given Georgia's status now as a swing and bellwether state.
So we can pontificate and talk all we want about the impact of the primaries, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and all the others on the midterms as much as we want. I'm going to ask you a question that I asked of another political analyst the other day. Is it about the midterm? Is it about the primaries, or as James Carville so eloquently asked back during the Bush-Clinton elections, is it about the economy, stupid?
Well, I think the answer is every election is about the voters. What are their hopes? What are their concerns? What are they worried about? What do they see as opportunities for the future? Right now, public opinion polling suggests that the overriding dominant issue is economic, the impact of inflation on people's lives. The key question isn't sort of necessarily though what those feelings are today, but what they will be 6 months from today in the November general election. What voters are concerned about, what they hope for, that will be the dominant issue in November.
Well, if you listen to the economic analysts, the economy will still be an issue, so we'll see how it weighs on the electorate. Chris Hand, always good to talk to you. Appreciate your insights. Good to have you here. Jen.